There is a mistake that millions of people make every single night that they would never recognize as a sleep mistake. Because it does not look like a mistake. It looks like a solution. You had a hard day. Your mind is full. The thoughts are cycling. Tomorrow's meeting, the thing someone said, the item on the to-do list that keeps sliding forward. You get into bed. The silence feels loud with your own thoughts. So you reach for something to give the mind a place to rest. You put on a familiar show, a calming podcast, a sleep playlist that has been running reliably for years, and within 20 minutes, you are asleep. You wake up 8 hours later feeling like you slept. You probably did, in terms of duration. What you almost certainly did not get, in the amounts your brain needed, is the specific sleep architecture that determines whether the brain wakes up repaired or depleted. And the thing you reached for to help you fall asleep is one of the primary reasons why. Let me start with what your brain does with audio while you sleep. Not what you assume it does. What the neuroscience shows it actually does. Your auditory system does not have a switch. There is no biological mechanism that simply turns off hearing when you lose consciousness. The auditory cortex remains active throughout sleep, processing sound, categorizing it, assigning meaning to it, responding to it. The specific way it does this changes across sleep stages, but the processing does not stop. During NREM sleep, including the slow-wave deep sleep phases where the glymphatic system runs its cleaning cycle and growth hormone is released, the sleeping brain receives auditory input and processes it through what researchers call K-complexes. A K-complex is a large, synchronous neural event that fires in response to an unexpected, potentially meaningful sound. It can be measured on EEG as a sharp wave, followed by a slower wave, and it represents a brief moment of elevated arousal, a transition toward lighter sleep, followed by a settling back. What makes K-complexes relevant here is what triggers them. Not just loud sounds, not just alarming sounds, specifically novel or unexpected sounds. Sounds that deviate from the ongoing acoustic pattern in a way that the sleeping brain cannot categorize as safe background. Research has confirmed that the sleeping brain is selective in this way. Familiar voices produce fewer K-complexes than unfamiliar voices. Predictable, repetitive sounds produce fewer than variable, unpredictable ones. The brain is not simply filtering noise. It is running a continuous threat detection algorithm on incoming audio. And every time that algorithm fires and produces a K-complex, there is a brief, unconscious arousal that costs the brain a fragment of its deep sleep cycle. Now think about what a television show, a podcast, or a playlist does in this context. Over the course of a night, the audio stream will change. New voices, new tones, transitions between topics, changes in tempo, in vocal intensity, in acoustic complexity. The sleeping brain encounters each of these as novel input. K-complexes fire. Micro-arousals occur. You never wake up, never register them consciously, but the EEG catches everyone. Deep sleep is fragmented into shallower cycles. The slow-wave phases are interrupted or truncated. REM cycles are disrupted, and the person wakes up 8 hours later having technically slept, but without the brain having run the programs those 8 hours were supposed to fund. Television in the bedroom adds a compounding factor that audio alone does not. The screen emits light, and not just any light. Blue wavelength light in the 460 to 480 nanometer range, which is maximally detected by the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells that signal your brain's master clock. Even at low brightness, even across a dark room, even with the screen turned away. If there is a television on in a bedroom where someone is sleeping, those photoreceptors are receiving blue wavelength input. They are firing. They are telling the suprachiasmatic nucleus that daylight conditions are present. Melatonin production, which should be rising steadily through the night to sustain the conditions for deep sleep, is suppressed. A study from the American Cancer Society published in JAMA Network Open in 2025, examining 122,058 adults, found that screen use before bed was associated with decreased sleep duration and worse self-reported sleep quality. The National Sleep Foundation's 2024 Consensus Panel, reviewing the evidence across 16 experts, noted that the content of pre-sleep screen use specifically impairs sleep through the cognitive arousal it generates, emotional engagement, suspense, stimulating narrative that keeps the nervous system elevated long after the screen is off or the person falls asleep. This is the specific mechanism I want to focus on, because it is the part that most people have never heard explained clearly. Research published in Sleep in early 2026 by researchers at the University of Pennsylvania found that pink noise, one of the most popular forms of sleep audio widely used as a sleep aid, actually reduced REM sleep and disrupted sleep recovery compared to silence. Pink noise is not music. It is not a podcast. It is a relatively consistent, non-narrative sound specifically designed not to be cognitively engaging. And it still reduced the REM sleep that is critical for memory consolidation and emotional regulation. If pink noise, the most benign possible form of sleep audio, still disrupts REM, what does a podcast do? What does a television drama do? What does a sleep playlist that transitions between songs, changes tempo, changes vocal presence do? The 2025 perspective in the journal Sleep reviewing sonic sleep aids, sleep music, ambient sounds, bedtime stories, sleep podcasts, concluded that while music-based relaxation shows modest evidence for improving sleep onset, empirical support for narrated content as a sleep aid is specifically limited. The mechanism for benefit has evidence. The claim of benefit throughout the night does not. Let me be specific about what REM disruption actually costs, because I find that people understand this intellectually, but have not connected it to what they actually experience the following day. REM sleep is the phase where the brain processes the emotional content of the previous day. During REM, the prefrontal cortex re-engages with the emotional memories formed during wakefulness, but in a context of reduced norepinephrine, a neurochemical associated with threat and reactivity. This is why REM sleep has been described as overnight emotional therapy. The events of the day are being replayed and reprocessed in a neurochemical environment that allows the brain to extract meaning without the acute emotional charge of the original experience. This is the mechanism by which sleeping on a problem genuinely helps, by which things that felt unbearable the night before can feel manageable in the morning. When REM is fragmented, when K-complexes are firing every few minutes because a podcast is playing, because the television is on, because a playlist is transitioning to a new track, this processing is interrupted. The emotional content from the previous day does not fully resolve. The person wakes up with a residual heaviness that they cannot identify clearly, a mild flatness, a slightly lower resilience threshold, a brain that is technically rested but emotionally unprocessed. Over weeks and months of fragmented REM, the cumulative effect is what clinicians recognize as elevated baseline stress reactivity, more pronounced mood fluctuations, reduced capacity for nuanced emotional responses, and the particular cognitive fatigue that comes not from insufficient hours, but from insufficient depth. People describe it as not feeling like themselves, as having their usual patience shortened, as thoughts that feel harder to complete than they used to. These are not personality traits. They are symptoms of a brain that has been denied its overnight repair process by the audio that was put on to help it sleep. But the deeper issue is not the audio. The audio is a symptom. Here is what is actually happening in the brain of a person who cannot fall asleep in silence. The brain is in a state of cognitive arousal, a technical term in sleep medicine that refers to a condition in which the brain's internal activity, not external stimulation, is preventing the transition to sleep. Thoughts that will not stop. A feeling of being mentally alert when you are physically exhausted. The inability to turn the mind toward quiet. Research has confirmed that cognitive hyperarousal is one of the primary perpetuating mechanisms of insomnia, and it is present at subclinical levels in a large portion of adults who would never describe themselves as having insomnia at all. They consider themselves people who need sound to fall asleep. What they actually are is people whose nervous systems have not adequately down-regulated from the high stimulation state of their waking day before they attempt to enter sleep. The modern evening is specifically engineered to produce this state. Social media, news feeds, emotionally engaging television, work communication, the dopaminergic reward loop of short-form video. Research found that pre-sleep engagement in cognitively activating content, including intellectually stimulating television, video games, and high-engagement social media, increases sleep onset latency, and negatively influences REM density. The brain arrives at the pillow already elevated, without the transition period that the nervous system needs to descend from high arousal to sleep-permissive low arousal. And then the audio begins. And instead of allowing the nervous system to complete the descent it never started, the audio gives the brain something to continue processing, keeping it in a state of light cognitive engagement that feels like rest but prevents the deep sleep the brain needed. The podcast is not solving the problem. It is covering the problem while simultaneously fragmenting the sleep that would, if protected, have helped the brain recover more efficiently. Here is the intervention. 2 components, both necessary. The first is a 90-minute intentional wind-down, not mildly less stimulating activity. A deliberate reduction in cognitive input starting 90 minutes before your target sleep time. No new information, no news, no social media, no work email, no content designed to engage emotionally or intellectually. The nervous system requires time to complete the downregulation it has been interrupting all evening, and it cannot complete that downregulation while still receiving stimulating input. Replace the high stimulation content with something that occupies the mind at a level below its arousal threshold. Low-intensity physical movement. A brief walk, gentle stretching, reduces cortisol and sympathetic nervous system activation. Low-engagement reading. Something familiar, not suspenseful, occupies the mind without amplifying arousal. Slow, deliberate exhalation. Extending your exhale to twice the length of your inhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system and begins the physiological descent towards sleep. Any of these works. The requirement is that they replace, not supplement, the stimulating content. Here is the physiological reason the 90 minutes matters specifically. The nervous system does not transition from high arousal to sleep-permissive low arousal instantaneously. It transitions gradually through a series of stages. The reduction in sympathetic tone, cortisol declining, heart rate slowing, body temperature beginning to drop, takes time. Research in chronobiology suggests that the full transition from peak evening arousal to the physiological conditions that support slow-wave sleep entry requires between 60 and 90 minutes of reduced stimulation. Compressing that window, going from high stimulation content directly to bed, or using audio to bridge the transition, means the nervous system arrives at sleep without having completed the descent it needed. The brain tries to sleep in a body that is still physiologically closer to awake than to sleep. The audio feels like a bridge. In neurological terms, it is more like a stall. The second component is silence. Complete silence and complete darkness. The sleep your brain needs, glymphatic clearance of the proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease, growth hormone release for tissue repair, REM-dependent memory consolidation and emotional processing, requires the auditory cortex to be free from novel input throughout the night, not just during the first sleep cycle. Every hour of audio that continues after you fall asleep is an hour during which K-complexes are firing, microarousals are occurring, and the depth of your sleep is being reduced. I want to address the objection directly. The silence is uncomfortable. For people who have fallen asleep to audio for years, removing it produces discomfort that feels like insomnia, heightened awareness of thoughts, restlessness. This is not a sign that silence does not work for you. It is a sign that your nervous system has learned to use external audio to manage cognitive arousal that it should be resolving through the wind-down process. The discomfort during the transition typically lasts 7 to 14 nights. What is on the other side is not just easier sleep. It is qualitatively different sleep. The kind that produces the rested feeling that people who have been sleeping to audio for years have forgotten to expect. Tonight, begin the 90-minute wind down. Turn the audio off completely when you get into bed. The first night will be harder. The 7th will feel like coming home. Your brain was not designed to fall asleep to a podcast. It was designed to fall asleep to quiet. Give it that.